Thank you. I have a motion on the closed meeting, please.
I move that the committee rise and report.
Report to you that Sarnia City Council met today to discuss assessment appeals. No votes were taken other than to give direction to staff. Staff were directed to execute the minutes of settlement for a property pertaining to the 2000 to 2016 tax years. And also report to you, we met in closed session to receive information regarding a matter of litigation or potential litigation regarding the Sarnia Harbor. No votes were taken. That's my report.
I move that Sarnia City Council adopt the report of the closed meeting.
All those in favor? Thank you. If we can move into the agenda then, the first item we have is a rezoning application related to 1401, 1403 Michigan Avenue. And Mr. Williams, you're making the presentation?
Thank you, Your Worship. Members of Council, fellow staff, members of the public. The application before you today is application number 3-2017-85 of 2002, and it's an application made by Longo Holdings, Inc. with respect to property located at 1401, 1403 Michigan Avenue. While we wait for the overhead to come up, I just want to explain to you the location of the property. It is on the southwestern side of Michigan Avenue and the Rapids Parkway. It's where the former Scotiabank property used to be at that corner. Thank you. Yeah, it's in an area called Development Area Number 1 in our official plan, and it's designated as local commercial in our official plan policies. The property is already developed with two buildings on it. The former bank property building is in the front of in the north side of the property, and at the back of it there is a 5-unit local commercial unit in there. The property was developed in accordance with a site plan development and is fully developed as we speak today. The proposal before you is not to change anything on the site. It's just to add an additional use within the existing zoning, and that zoning is it's an LC1-27 that permits a number of uses on the site. Some of the uses include daycare centers, existing homes, laundromats, offices, pharmacies, restaurants, small-scale retail, and animal hospital also are included in there. What the applicant wants to do is add a medical center clinic as a permitted use on the site, and that would allow him to market the property better as it is right now. So we looked at it from the policies within the official plan, and we looked at it from the settlement that was agreed on with the Sifton property that allows for this type of use in the local commercial use zones within this area. And we think it was appropriate to add this use in this particular site, and as such we recommend that the application be approved.
Are there any questions? Councillor Gillis?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Williams. There are several dental clinics along that stretch, and I was just wondering, is there a point where you get saturated with them?
Your Worship, looking at medical center uses, we don't look and see whether an area is saturated or not for that particular use. We look at whether it's appropriate for the particular site. I don't know what the economic conditions are with regards to dental clinics, but I'm just going on what the planning rationale would be for this particular site.
Thank you. Councillor White, Councillor Micho?
Thank you, Your Worship. There's reasonably limited parking at this particular site. Is that at all a concern with the potential designation for medical use?
Your Worship, through you again, when the site was developed, we looked at the number of parking spaces for the permitted uses in there, and the parking standards that we have for medical center is similar to those for pharmacies and for a animal hospital, and as such we consider this to be in keeping with what the parking standards would allow for this site.
Councillor Micho?
Yes, just to kind of reiterate, obviously I believe it would be an allowed use, but there's no intention of the owner of the property to pursue any kind of methadone clinic or clinic such as that. in our report. I'm just bringing it out to the public part.
Yes, through you, Your Worship, if I may touch on that particular issue. Medical centers are a use that is defined in the zoning bylaw. Methadone clinic, from my understanding, is a dispensing of medication and or prescriptions by a medical practitioner. Within the zoning, we address the issue by looking at the use and not the users and how they conduct their business. And it's my understanding from the applicant that this type of activity or this type of medical activity is not something that he's looking to encourage or to sanction on the site.
Thank you. Does the applicant or their agent wish to to council? And can I ask, is there anyone else that wishes to speak to this application? I see no one else.
Thank you, Your Worship. Lou Longo. We purchased this property about 10 years ago. Built the Bank of Nova Scotia on the corner, thinking we had a good long-term tenant. Well, bank's closed. So we've been trying to market this property for the last 18 months. And we've had several inquiries for retail uses, but some of them have come through the medical part. And now we have several dentists that have actually called and would like to locate there. And we were actually surprised to find out that we're not permitted to have a dentist there. So we went through the rezoning process. I'm in agreement with everything that the planning department is recommending. Have no problem with their report. Just want to clarify again, this methadone thing, I have no idea where that came from. We have no interest in that operation or that use at this site now or in the future. We want to be good neighbors. We've been developing properties in Sarnia for over 30 years now, and I feel we do a good job, and we just want to try to get this space filled.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Longo. I'm going to call one more time. Are there any other speakers? I see no one. I'm going to close the public portion of the meeting and ask for a resolution. Councillor Couch.
I would move the recommendation as outlined.
Councillor Rusevich, you're seconding?
Seconding.
Any discussion? All those in favor? That is done. We have two other planning hearings before we get to the two delegations. Next is related to modified shipping containers. I presume there's not a report on this. It's simply... I'd like to go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship, members of council, staff, and members of the public here today and at home. This rezoning application 2-2017-85 of 2002 is a general amendment to the zoning bylaw 85 of 2002 initiated by City Council, and it would apply citywide and provide a definition for modified shipping container. In 2016, there was a similar general amendment to the zoning bylaw application 2 of 2016, and that amendment provided a definition for shipping containers and directed the use of shipping containers as accessory buildings to industrial areas of the city, and it provided regulations for the use, and it provided regulations for temporary use of shipping containers. In October, when that application was considered, Council had requested clarification on the term modified, which was used in the definition for shipping container that was provided. As a refresher, I'll just read the zoning definition for shipping container that was introduced in October of last year. Shipping container means a prefabricated metal container or structure having a floor, ceiling or roof, walls, and doors that is specifically designed for storage of goods and materials while under transport by ship, rail, or truck. For the purpose of this definition, a shipping container does not include a motor vehicle or transport trailer. Shipping containers which are modified to other uses defined by this bylaw, such as a dwelling or a restaurant, are no longer shipping containers. The purpose of this current zoning bylaw amendment is to provide that definition and meaning of modified shipping containers. If a container is modified to a different use under the building code, that could include a whole host of different requirements. Could include foundations, doors, windows, lighting, plumbing, heating, insulation, electrical, smoke alarms, etc. For the purpose of this application, the following definition is proposed. It's set out in the report, and I'll read it. Shipping container modified means a shipping container altered from its original state and appearance and used as a main building or part thereof, and shall include foundations, windows and doors, and external painting or cladding, as well as all other provisions required under the Ontario Building Code and Fire Code for the building's intended use. The intent is that a main building, which is a main use on a property, could potentially be made of these containers, and it would permit the main or principal use of the property. And as I had mentioned, this is an amendment. It would apply citywide, and it's staff recommendation that the application be approved, which is introducing this new definition. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no questions. A public meeting. Okay. Is there anyone that wishes to speak for this on this particular application? See no one? So I'll close the public portion of the meeting and look for a resolution. Councillor White, Councillor Gillis. Move the recommendation. Okay. Those in favor? That is done. We have one last planning rezoning application, which is related to general housekeeping amendment.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council, and members of the public in attendance tonight. My name is Jordan Folkens, and I'm presenting on rezoning application 7-2016-85 of 2002, which is a city-initiated general housekeeping amendment to the zoning bylaw. The purpose of this application is to increase the amount of affordable housing units in the city of Sarnia through secondary dwelling units. As part of an affordable housing strategy, council directed staff to consider zoning changes to permit secondary dwelling units in all single-detached, semi-detached, and townhouse dwellings in the city. However, upon further review of the proposal, it was noted that city infrastructure does not have sufficient capacity to accommodate intensification in certain areas. For this reason, staff has proposed to implement the secondary dwelling unit amendment in 3 phases. This application represents the first phase, which would relax regulations in the city's more intense zones that are currently allowing converted dwellings. Proposed changes would remove the minimum frontage and lot area requirements for secondary dwelling units, reduce the minimum floor area of secondary dwelling units from 45 square meters to 35 square meters, permit secondary dwelling units in basements located more than 50% below grade, remove references to outdated legislation, and prohibit secondary dwelling units in natural hazard areas. Now, the proposed amendments to the zoning bylaw would increase the number of secondary dwelling units in the city by relaxing standards in areas where they are already permitted. Regulations have been proposed that conform to local, regional, and provincial policies and reflect best practices in other municipalities. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I see none. Is there anyone that wishes to speak to this application? Again, I see no one, so I'll close the public portion of the meeting and look for a resolution. Councillor Brusevich, Councillor Mitro. No discussion. All those in favor? That is done. We have 2 delegations. The first is Debbie Krukowski. And this is related to the special area rate for transit.
Mayor Bradley, members of council, members of the general public. My name is Debbie Krukowski and I reside on Stathis Boulevard. First, let me thank you for the opportunity to speak to you on this matter today. I guess I feel like I've stepped into a time machine and have been transported back to the beginning of this century. Back in 2000, the council of the day also tried to roll the transit levy into the general millrate. It didn't work. How did the transit levy start in Sarnia? Well, it didn't. This is a carryover from the town of Clearwater days. Before amalgamation, the town of Clearwater entered into an agreement with the city of Sarnia to provide bus service to the Wiltshire subdivision. As a consequence, the cost of this service was recovered through a special service rate on the taxes for just those residents who actually received the service. You see, many people moved into the town of Clearwater knowing that they would receive less service and as a result enjoy lower taxes. Fast forward to today. The report completed by the Director of Finance was to, and I quote, describe the advantages and disadvantages of the current transit area for taxation revenue to support conventional transit service, as well as undertake a financial analysis to levy all properties in Sarnia to support conventional transit service, regardless of whether transit service is provided to all areas of the city. End quote. So the advantages of the current transit area for taxation revenue to support transit are clear. The people who have access to buses pay a transit levy. The disadvantages of the current system is noted in the report as the cost to administer the transit area taxation, and the obvious one, that of missing out the additional revenue from very valuable real estate that is currently outside of the transit area. So let's examine that for a bit. 14 years ago, I attended council meetings numerous times to talk about the transit special service levy. After 3 years of wrangling with the council of the day, they agreed that the application of Section 326 of the Municipal Act applied, and there was no recourse but to maintain a transit special service area and update it as required. So why am I here today? What's changed? The argument is made within the report that, quote, the majority of municipal services are included in the general levy with costs borne by all property owners, end quote. This is true, and the examples given are such things as arenas, parks, pools, and street lighting. All of these examples are services or facilities that can be used by all residents. Access to a bus service is not unless you consider driving to a bus stop, parking, and then using the transit service. Why would anybody do that? The director goes on in the report to mention it is generally viewed that property taxes are not fee-for-service based, but rather a method of distributing the cost for local government services and education throughout the community. Why then did this council create a 28-page book of fees for services? Using the director's logic, these fees should be rolled into the general mill rate because property taxes are not fee-for-service based. Should everyone pay for berthage fees at the Sarnia docks whether they own a boat or not? Should individuals pay for a change of ownership notation at the finance department when they buy a new house? Isn't that really for everyone's benefit so you can send a corrected tax bill out? And there are the administration costs associated with each and every one of these fees. So how do you rationalize that transit is any different? It is a service or benefit that not all of the property owners of the municipality can access. Therefore, it is a special service. Eliminating the transit special service levy would not be acting in good faith, and when placed alongside your fee-for-service book, you have little reason or rationale to change the bylaw. Also requested as part of your report was a financial analysis to levy all properties in Sarnia, regardless of whether or not they receive the service. This hasn't been done. The Director of Finance has provided a minimal assessment in her report assessing that 2,210 residential properties would be affected. What's the value of those properties? What about the increased revenues the city would gain by adding these properties? What about commercial properties? What about industrial properties? What about agricultural properties? And then the flip side of the coin. How much is it going to cost you to provide all of these areas with the service? Because if you remove the Transit Special Service Levy, then according to the Municipal Act, you must provide the service. So let me walk you through the legislation. Section 326 of the Municipal Act says that a municipality may create a bylaw which identifies a special service. It goes on, and I will come back to that, but first let's look at the definition of a special service. In Section 326, special service means a service or activity of a municipality that is A, not being provided or undertaken throughout the municipality. So clearly we have a case for identifying transit as a special service within the definition of the Municipal Act. Go back to the conditions under which special services must be handled as mandated by the Municipal Act. Council may designate the area of a municipality in which the residents and property owners receive or will receive an additional benefit from the special service. I'm going to repeat that because it's important to your determinations and your deliberations today. Council may also designate the area of the municipality in which the residents and property owners receive or will receive an additional benefit from the special service that they are not currently getting. So now, as with any government legislation, we look for the limitations, and of course there is one. An area designated by the municipality under that section I just read to you cannot include an area in which the residents and property owners do not currently receive the benefit. Or, if you're collecting this money in advance of providing the service, you must establish a reserve fund to finance the expenditure. What does that mean? City Council cannot include an area that currently does not receive transit service unless it intends to provide said service in the next budget year or puts in place a reserve fund for future provision of that service. A letter from the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, John Garrettson, was provided to Sarnia City Council in their deliberations of April 2003, in which he explicitly stated that unless Council intended to provide transit service to the entire municipality, then Section 326 of the Act was applicable. This letter was addressed to me, and it was as a direct response to inquiries made during a personal visit with Minister Garrettson by a delegation from Sarnia consisting of myself, Jean Ashmore, Julie English, and Anne-Marie Gillis. This was, I believe, the catalyst that created Bylaw number 40 of 2003. So in closing, I would like you to ask yourself, if you live on the corner of Blackwell Side Road and Churchill, or Confederation and Mondawmin, or Telfer and London Line, should you pay for transit service that you are never going to receive? Members of the Lambton Federation of Agriculture are here today. The councillors that sit on Lambton County Council recently heard from them that MPAC has increased agricultural assessments approximately 700%. Is this council going to add to their burden by now imposing a transit levy on them and other constituents for a service they will never receive? You can choose the fair and equitable option and maintain the transit special service levy, which of course is my hope. Or you can choose to eliminate the transit special service levy and impose a tax increase on constituents of Sarnia who, by admission of your own master transportation plan, will never receive it. Just remember, if you choose this latter option, it will come into effect in an election year. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Councilor Brusevich?
I have a few questions. I try to limit to simple, short, and easy enough for the speaker to answer. This special transit area bylaw came in, was implemented by the slimmest possible margins possible, 5-4 vote. We're getting back to it because the City of Sarnia Master Transportation Study recommends the rescinding of this bylaw. The Sarnia Transit Accessibility Committee recommends the same. And the moment this bylaw was implemented, all kinds of new problems begin. Every time you deal with arbitrary line, 450 meters, whatever, you create the fairness argument. Tell me, for example, right now we have two houses, one next to each other. That's where the borderline is. How would you reconcile that one pays towards transit, one does not?
Through your worship, with all due respect to the councillor, it was the council of the day that determined it was a 450-meter line in the sand. I didn't determine that. I can't change that. I have no opinion on that. However, what I will say with respect to services, if you're going to provide transit to the entire municipality, I think then you're probably on the right track. And I think if you read your go back and read your transportation master plan again, section 7.7 does recommend that the transit levy be rescinded. However, section 2.3 says rescinded or amended. So there's some discrepancy there. The other point I would say is to your point through your worship, the Transit Advisory Committee, the TAAC, how many people outside of the transit area serve on that committee? Because if you're only got people who have bus service sitting on that committee, how can they make a reasonable and understandable decision to recommend rescinding something when there's people who live outside of that area that don't have representation on that committee?
I'm glad that you recognize this 450 meters was arbitrary line. It's still there. I'm aware of the fact that we have quite a community of transit users who may live 1 mile, 2 miles away from the nearest bus, and they're using it. They don't pay towards it. This extended itself by far more than would happen if it was not happen. We have people who jump on the bicycles, go to the bus stop, put it on the rack, use the transit system. They don't pay it. They got all the benefits. They don't pay it. So the whole point of what's accessible, what's not, it's totally arbitrary. And again, you can answer that a bit later, but what you said, it's not provided. And again, is the question is, what's accessible? You were comparing that to arena. Well, if the distance from the facility, bus stop, arena, is the measure of access, why shouldn't we have? And believe me, I have plenty of people telling me, I live, so far away from the beach. I shouldn't be paying any cost associated with it. If somebody is 450 meters from the arena, the same argument applies here, applies there. It's accessibility.
Yeah, okay, just I want to focus on questions. So
no, that is a question, and again, you may be laugh all you want, but when this
Point of order. I think that the councillor is badgering.
I'm not badgering nobody. I'm asking a question.
Delegate, and I think that the question
the councillor's
has been
being put on
asked.
notice, so just ask. I mean, I don't want to just turn into a debate between the two.
Okay, so this you should be.
Question.
Well, the question is, if we have this exemption on the bus system, what is there not to have special areas for people who have no sidewalks? What is about the people who have no traffic lights? People who are 2 miles away from the arenas. Access, 450 meters. It applies to transit, it applies to anything else. So how can you answer those people who are actually asking, saying, why is it that there is exemptions given here, that not everybody pays, but why doesn't it apply to other facilities that may not be accessible either?
My answer to your question, through your worship, is if I wish to go to an arena, now as it happens I now live in a transit area, so I can catch a bus to it. When I didn't live in a transit area, I did not have the opportunity to visit that arena through the transit system. I had to drive there. But I still had the ability to get to the arena. I had no ability to get to a bus stop. And the 450-meter concept was devised, as I recall, because it seemed a reasonable walking distance from your home to the nearest bus stop. And that was the rationale of the day of the 450 meters. Again, I'm not to debate whether that was reasonable or not. I did not have anything to say about that number. That was my understanding to the rationale. As far as the argument to, I'm sorry, I lost part of your point in there. I believe as far as the ability of people living in the vicinity of a swimming pool or an arena or equating those types of facilities to transit is an unfair comparison because, thank you.
Councillor Brusevich, I'm going to say to you, you are being disrespectful to the speaker.
Am I?
Yes.
Okay, I try to be as respectful as I can.
I understand you feel emotionally about this, but I think also there needs to be that balance there. Councillor Couch, question, and then we'll move forward.
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Krukowski. I've just a couple of questions, just to make sure I'm understanding the key points of what you're saying. The first, you have an issue with the way that the dollar cost, if the transit areas were removed, it's reflected in residential only, but not commercial, not farming, not industrial. Did I get you there? Okay.
Yeah, my concern was within the report that the director spoke about 2,210 residential properties and did a mathematical equation as to how the mill rate was going to adjust for those properties. What has not been included in that is, for example, the businesses down on Plank Road. There's a fairly substantial commercial district there. Plains Midland, for example, is an industrial facility that is now going to be perhaps impacted by transit being rolled into a general mill rate. And certainly there is our farming community that is massive in Sarnia municipality, and what impact financially is going to happen to them. That was what I didn't see in the report.
Okay, my second and last question is it your contention that according to the Municipal Act, and I believe this is what guided Council's decision back in 2004, if the Municipal Act requires the municipality, if it removes a transit area, to make a commitment to expand transit services to all areas that contribute? Was that your sense of what the Act said?
That is my understanding of the Act, is that, and in fact your transportation master plan actually speaks to that goal of getting transit to all areas of the community. And so I think when you are making this decision, the Municipal Act speaks very clearly. If the intent is to collect funds in advance of providing the service in order to get the capital funds ready necessary, then there has to be a reserve fund set up specifically for that goal, and there has to be a plan to move forward in expansion of that service. And you can't charge people for a service unless you intend and have a plan moving forward on when that service is going to get them. And they can't be on the never, never plan. It is very clear in the Municipal Act that it is within a budget year. So if you do this year, then starting next year, you're going to be required to give service to that area.
Thank you.
Councillor Gillis?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Krukowski, for your presentation. You're always very succinct and everything. The one thing that I have a little difficulty trying to justify and get my head around is, since 2003, we've seen a big increase in the use of caravans, and people are eligible to use caravans all around the city. It doesn't matter where they live, whether they're in the transit area or not. So that's kind of the wrinkle in all of this. So where do you see that applying?
Sorry, not to debate. I have a question back to the council because I don't understand what the wrinkle is, because conventional transit is on within a defined area, and those people who are receiving that transit get the service. The caravan service is in the general mill rate, as I understand it, and it is available to the entire community. So that's the fairness. That's the scale that we're on. And another point that I want to respond to through your worship to Councillor Brezevich, the fact that we're saying that people live a mile out and then bike into the nearest bus stop and then are using it and not paying for it. Isn't there a fee for getting on the bus? I mean, isn't there a money that has to be put in a change box once you get on the bus? So, there's your user fee and there's your response to that. I mean, if somebody has to actually ride a bike to get there, then
that's a personal choice.
That's a personal choice, exactly. Thank you.
Councillor White, Councillor Brusevich, and then we'll move forward.
Thank you. Now, understandably, just to that point, that's a subsidized rate, but I do appreciate your point on that, and I would also see the environmental advantage rewarding somebody for taking their bike. So just to clarify then, you are perhaps cost aside okay though with the idea that if transit were to actually expand, then that would include more people paying into the system. Is that correct? Is that if we put a bus up Blackwell Road, would that be okay?
I'm smiling because I no longer live up Blackwell Road. I'm in a transit area now, so I am paying for transit, and I'm here really speaking to something that happened 14 years ago. But, back 14 years ago, the people of the day have always maintained, give me the service, I'll pay my fair share. But if I'm not, don't expect me to pay for something that I can never have access to. And so, yes, to your point, through your worship, I believe that if the service is provided, and I looked back, I found some of my notes from 2002 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3, and at the time there were suggestions made to the council of the day that you could do dial-a-bus, or you could do, there was other sort of think outside of the box type ideas that were coming forward to try and, provide that access. But again, it was deemed really cost prohibitive because you've got one house per mile out in the country, and it's cost prohibitive.
Thank you.
Councillor Brusevich.
I just wish to answer the question from Ms. Krukowski. She said they pay, the fares do not recover the cost. There's another guy who lives in transit areas, pay to the transit through their taxes, and also has to put that fare. So obviously it is the guy who is in non-transit area, he doesn't pay the same, the other guy who is doing the same thing. So I hope that answers your question, that there's no equity.
I didn't have a question, but thank you.
No, you did say you had the question.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Krukowski. We'll deal with this in a few minutes. We have one other delegation, and then we'll deal with the report. I've got Ms. Margaret Bird.
Your Worship, members of Council, City Hall, members of the gallery and those watching from home. I'm here this evening to talk about how the public are being left behind and being denied their freedom of speech, freedom of information and freedom of choice, which is a violation of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms Act as it appears under the Canadian Democratic Constitution. Up until 2.5 years ago, we were a democracy, with all our freedoms and transparency of all city spending in place. Now that has all changed. Everything is hidden from the public, and we're not given the chance to give our input prior to motions being presented and passed by Council. I've always considered myself very well educated, but this whole scenario just baffles me, Council. I'm hoping you can bring some clarity to my confusion. I have some points for you to consider and respond to as follows, please. There was a previous public discussion by Council about the paper ballot polling stations and for keeping these alongside the electronic voting, but city officials have gone ahead and cancelled that without further discussion or input on voting from the public. Can you please tell me why you bypassed us again and didn't add this to the 2018 election ballot? Worldwide research has shown electronic voting to not be safe and secure. It shows that it does not get the younger people to vote. In fact, the numbers have dropped. 75% of all voters here are 50 and older. A large percentage of those people are disabled, in nursing homes, and don't have computers or cell phones. Without having set physical places to vote and set individuals to monitor the proceedings, there is no absolute control over the results. If we finally decide to go with electronic voting, an initial trial with paper ballots and electronic voting side by side should be tried, and transitional elements built into the proceedings. Before committing 130,000 of our tax dollars to a company with an adverse financial history, why wasn't due diligence carried out, and why wasn't this also added to the 2018 election ballot? At the end of last year, Council imposed a gag order on people by amending the Code of Conduct, stifling everyone's freedom of speech and expression, both inside and outside City Hall, a move that was totally unconscionable, as everyone has the right to free speech. Although municipalities are autonomously run, they are not above the law and still have to work for us. A special projects fund has apparently been earmarked for limo services to ferry out-of-town chamber managers and politicians to and from Sarnia Airport for the chamber event in May. Last time I checked, these officials didn't need any help financially. Why would you spend our tax dollars on this when there are so many other urgent City of Sarnia needs? The city infrastructure is in urgent need of repair, and no new plans have been indicated for funding this work. But I'm sure you have this all in hand now, as you've been spending lots of money elsewhere. Deputy Mayor should not be an internal appointment. All deputy mayors in Lambton County are elected by the people, not appointed by council. The current system is ample, with each councillor taking a turn as acting mayor, allowing them to gain some experience. Putting up walls instead of tearing them down is no way to move forward. For 54 years there's been no need for a deputy mayor, even back in the 1960s, when the City of Sarnia was in charge of many more departments. Today there is still no need for a deputy mayor. If council insists, why hasn't this been added to the 2018 election ballot so that the people can vote and decide, and not council? The boat ramp, apparently that won't be ready until June now. Why wasn't it ready for March as planned? Will there be a full account disclosed on Centennial Park and all the final expenses? Why so much out-of-province hiring when we have local firms available? Harbour dredging went to a Quebec company. Electronic voting went to a Nova Scotia company, who already had many financial problems and who were not the lowest bidder. What happened to due diligence, and where is the municipal support for our domestic economy? Fluoride is an incomprehensible way of medicating people. The residents are the only people who should be deciding how to manage their health, and once again this needs to be on the 2018 election ballot. City Council has spent almost $200,000 on renos, all unbudgeted and taken from our reserve fund. With all the latest staff additions and salary increases at City Hall, Apparently the city budget is doing very well, so we should have the money to spend on other things, e.g. infrastructure, boat ramp, etc. Since I can't imagine that council would spend money that they didn't have. I've also heard a rumour that major renos are now planned for City Hall's third floor. If this is true, where is the money coming from? And the latest, the CAO, Chief Administrative Officer, which I see in the minutes for tonight, has been asked to be put in place immediately, forthwith. Why has the city manager requested that title change? Is it in title only, or is there a position description change, and will there be another increase of salary too? $300,000 of taxpayer dollars was spent on 2 reports, which did not contain any reference to needing a deputy warden or deputy mayor. But council still went ahead, trying to move the mayor's office to the Valley Bus Depot, taking away his access key to City Hall and docking 3 months' salary. The intellect of the voting public should never be underestimated. They have read the reports and know exactly what is going on. Hiring of an integrity commissioner who has no integrity. He did not have a good track record 2 years ago, and a definite trail of bias followed him everywhere. As different news sources continue to report, quote, his conduct was unbecoming. The individual was not doing his job in Muskoka Lakes, as per the TML Code of Conduct or the Law Society Rules of Professional Conduct. He was also booted out of Collingwood, also exed from Brampton, soon to be out of Mississauga, and now Sarnia, unquote. Due diligence wasn't carried out here either, and still he is paid a $3,000 retainer, $280 per hour, and 52 cents per kilometre for his mileage. Has he in fact reported back to the municipality yet on all his expenses? Also, has any other lawyer been paid yet, and will that be disclosed? According to the report in the Observer on Saturday, the city manager was holding an open public meeting at 2 p.m. today in meeting room number 2 to discuss IT matters. I don't recall that being discussed or even requested at the last council meeting. Why are there so many communication disconnects throughout the city? The present method of actions undertaken by some members of council leaves itself open to a conflict of interest being quite obvious and contrary to the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, which states, quote, if there is a matter that touches on the councillor's direct or indirect pecuniary interest or promotion, there is a duty of the councillor to step aside, unquote. I encourage everyone to read this act so that they are aware of all its intricacies and how it affects and applies to those serving the public. The only way Sarnia can move forward is if we all work together as a team. So in conclusion, I have 3 requests for all public servants, those elected and those hired. Number 1, please resolve all issues before moving on to any other things. Number 2, please remove all the dictatorial gag orders, imposed sanctions, and stifling of freedoms and human rights so that we can all return to being a democracy, which is part of the established Canadian Constitution. And 3, most importantly, in order to prove to the voting public that there is no hidden agenda, after council has gone ahead with all major decisions without our input and votes, is to please make sure that everything I've mentioned tonight is kindly added to the 2018 election ballot. Thank you.
Questions? See none. Thank you very much then. Thank you.
Thank you.
If we can move council to the correspondence and to the regular agenda, and the first item is the special service area rate for transit. I'm looking for a motion. Councillor Schulden?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move for discussion to eliminate the transit levy, direct staff to prepare a bylaw change for the distribution of conventional transit costs through the general levy, providing 21 days of public notice prior to an open meeting where the repeal of bylaw 40 of 2003 would be considered.
For a seconder, Councillor Rusevich. Discussion.
Okay, I'd like to start. Thank you. I brought this to council back in November because I feel that we all benefit in this city from having accessible transportation. Accessible transportation is the key to a thriving economy. That includes having an accessible community, whether it be by flight, train, bus, car, good roads, what have you. As you can see on page 56, some of the indirect benefits associated with providing public transit that really stuck out for me. Transportation for individuals that are no longer able to drive, having retirees, life changes, providing student and college student transportation, broadening the labor market to help with employee recruitment, useful for newcomers to navigate through the city, and the fact that our buses are included in our city's emergency and evacuation plan. We have a college here, we have a lot of industry, corporations. These people are counting on us to ensure that we have a marketable and accessible city. All property owners share in the costs of our parks, our paved roads, safe bridges, education, and all property owners should be sharing in the city's cost distribution of transit. For example, when we pay I pay taxes for shoreline protection in Brights Grove. I don't live in Brights Grove. I don't have easy access to that beach like they do. But these are things that provide a quality of life for the people that live here and for the newcomers that we're trying to attract and trying to help in business growth and strengthen our economy. So for all those reasons, because I support our youth, our students, our newcomers, our employee recruitment, therefore I do support this motion.
Other speakers, Councillor Boucher, Councillor Mitchell, Councillor Gillis.
First of all, I just want to give you a couple of examples according to my experience. Some years ago, one of the areas, the bus was extended to them. They got together and they had a petition delivered to me, and I brought the city council say they don't want the bus there in that area, and the buses, the city agreed to that. If you ask our city engineer, he will tell you in answer to some question that when you don't have sewers in the city, there is no cost to it. So, and the speaker mentioned way down in the outlying area, the taxes went to the roof. The people, some areas, they don't have sewers, they don't have curbs, they don't have gutters, and if you, some of them, the taxes went to the roof. Some of the, in the audience, I think, pays over $10,000, $15,000 a year in taxes. And he doesn't have any of these facilities. No curbs, no gutters, no sewers, no sidewalks. And so you add this extra cost when the buses are not required in these areas. It's not good economics. It's not a good business. So I'd be voting against the motion.
Councillor Mitchell and Councillor Gillis. Councillor Kelch.
Through your worship, to staff, the first speaker intimated that, in fact, if it was moved through in this direction, that we did a blanket cost, that we would then, in effect, be required within a very short period of time, the next fiscal year, to provide service to areas that are now underserviced. I wonder if I could have some comment on whether or not that's actually the case. I note that we're way in the minority of municipalities with this designation, where it's not a general cost to everyone, and I'm understanding that I see both sides of the argument, but that might be a mitigating factor. I wonder if you might comment.
Through the chair to council, the special service levy, section 326, special service area of the Municipal Act, is available for municipalities to use. It is not a requirement for municipalities to use, is my understanding. So for instance, Sarnia does not use this section of the Act for street lights, which are, provided in some areas and not others. So it is something that municipalities can decide to use, and as noted in the report, out of about 80 municipalities that provide transit service, there are, I believe, 10 that have a special area levy for transit, where they only charge that
to the folks that receive the service in whatever definition that is.
Thank you. Councillor Gillis. Councillor Kelcher.
Thank you,
I'll
Mr.
call the
Mayor,
question.
and thank you very much for the report. I thought it was well-rounded. However, I did find that there were pieces missing, and that has been raised already with regard to the financial implication it would be on particularly industries, and one of those industries is agriculture, and the city is 75% rural, and we have many large operations within our city limits. When I looked at the 80 that were given to us and then narrowed into some of the other ones, I looked at the cities themselves, and when I looked at these cities, some of them have grown beyond what they were many, many years ago, certainly the ones that I'm familiar with. For example, the Loyalist Township. Sudbury is another one. Now it's the Greater Sudbury area, which takes in many, many smaller communities. Even the city of Ottawa has a very large rural base now. So when we met with Mr. Gerritsen, he was quite clear to us at the time that if you didn't provide the service within the year, you couldn't claim that you were going to expand the service and hope that you were going to someday give the service to people. If anything, we see that the service is being underutilized. People are not taking the bus. The other thing I see is we have a declining population. That is increasing the use of the caravan, but the caravan is covered under the general levy. So given all those things, from my perspective, I think the status quo is the way to go for us because of the fact that we still don't know how this is going to impact large commercial properties. When I look at, I think it's $47 per 100,000. Well, when you multiply that factor to what some of the industries that would be impacted on this are, it's quite substantial. And are we in a position right now to expand our service? Many in Brights Grove would like an improved service, and we haven't been able to accomplish that goal yet. So with that, I will not support this, but I will maintain the status quo.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Kelch.
Thank you, Worship. I was around here for the original discussion back in 2004, and I remember when you talk about transit, and Councillor Schulten has done a good job of explaining the benefits of transit, and I've always thought that the people who need transit really need transit, and I think it's also possible to make a case that over time that we may be coming into a situation with our population that we start to see ridership on conventional buses increase. But that's a big if. And I certainly would not be comfortable moving forward without significant public input to find out whether folks want this or not. There would be a significant financial hit to industrial, manufacturing, and agricultural properties that are already struggling with a 700% increase in their assessment rates from MPAC. It does bother me a bit that we're showing a declining ridership, I should say, and that could be for a number of different reasons, but it's troubling nonetheless. And when I look at our budgets over the years and I look at the transit line, I do not believe that councils, this one or future ones, in the foreseeable future, are going to want to spend significant dollars to expand the system. So, and it's already been mentioned about the Minister Gerritsen from back in the day, who basically said that a city who wants to get rid of their transit area had better have a solid plan to improve and expand their system if they're going to collect money from people to pay for it. So I love our transit system, but I can't see making this significant change at this time. Maybe something will change in the future. Who knows? But right now, I won't be able to support the motion.
For the vote, Councillor Savage, then I'll call the question.
Well, I agree with what Councillor Kelch was saying here about the public input, and I don't think we should be moving on one way or the other until we do go through this public input. So I would make a motion that we table this item until, say, reasonable time. I don't know what that would be, perhaps September of this year.
I would need more clarification on that motion, Councillor Brusevich.
To gather public input, to see which way the community wants to deal with this particular issue.
Okay, so I'm going to ask, is that public input through the Transit Committee? Is it public input through a public meeting of council?
No, I would say through the council. I think the Transit Committee has received its input from the public. I think this is for the whole council to actually connect with the public and make the decision, take into account all the merits of this exemption or special transit area, and reconcile that with what the public sentiment is.
Okay, that's not a debatable motion. I do see if there's a seconder, Councillor White. So it is not debatable under the rules. Those in favor of that motion? Those opposed? That passed. Thank you. Let's move on then to the next item, which is a noise exemption bylaw.
So moved.
Couch, Councillor White. All those in favor? Okay, moving on to the next one's another noise bylaw exemption. Councillor White, Councillor Mitro. All those in favor? That is done. Next is related to a piece of equipment at the Chris Hadfield Airport. Councillor Gillis, Councillor Kelch. All those in favor? That is passed. Moving on to another piece of equipment purchase. Councillor Couch, Councillor Schulten. All those in favor? That is done. Next is an agreement, renewing an agreement with the Village of Point Edward, a long-standing agreement. Councillor Mitro, Councillor Gillis. All those in favor? That is passed. Next is a long-time agreement between us and the Board of Education, and looking for council support. Councillor Fushi, Councillor Couch. All those in favor? That is passed. Next is related to cycling on city sidewalks with a couple of recommendations to you. Councillor White, Councillor Gillis, you're moving the recommendations?
Yes, thank you.
Discussion? Councillor Gillis?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I want to thank all of the people who contributed to writing this report. It's quite extensive, and I know that I was certainly one of the proponents who was quite excited about having some sort of a pilot project to allow cycling on the streets to see if it would work. But I'm very grateful that all of the EMS, the fire, police, all came together and put forward this recommendation. And even since this particular motion was brought forward as a possible pilot project, I have seen very, very troubling incidences of people on sidewalks and coming into almost near collisions with pedestrians, particularly in the downtown core. So looking at what has been recommended, which is an extensive education program, I think that is only as good as we can do. And I'm wondering, this education program is for cyclists and motorists, but how are we going to roll it out? Because there is that real controversy, I would say, between cyclists and motorists on who should do what, where, and all that good stuff. A lot of the education that we used to receive about cycling used to be done in the schools, but I don't believe that program is around anymore. So we are educating a public that is going to be cycling more and more. We want the infrastructure to be improved, but in the meantime, how are we going to get motorists to respect cyclists? That is a Herculean effort. Does anyone have a possible explanation or answer?
Through the chair, staff is working with the Blue Water Trails Committee, and we're also working with some other agencies to try to figure out what that education plan looks like. We haven't put the particulars to it yet. When we have something concrete that we feel will be workable, we will report back to council on what that education plan is. We simply wanted to provide something to council as a part of this reporting back, and simply not saying no, we won't allow bicycles on sidewalks. We wanted to provide some form of something to council to use. I'll go report back through my staff, and we'll figure out what that plan might look like, and then we'll come back to council.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Schulten?
Thank you. Just a comment, Mayor Bradley. I remember that speaker back in September wanting us to change that bylaw, and, as a mother, and I felt the same way, let the bikes on the sidewalk, but this is a good report, and I understand it, and I agree the best way to go is to provide that extra education, and, I have a hard time, disagreeing with the liability and risk on page 97, where for cyclist injuries, most of them are caused on the sidewalk, near the driveways. So when I see that and read the reports about injuries, I'm not going to support something that would maybe cause more. So I think the best way to go is spending that money on the education.
Councillor Couch, and I'll call the question.
Thank you, Worship. Just a quick comment. I came very close to colliding with a cyclist last week. I was leaving a parking lot, and a cyclist was on the sidewalk, and I came very close to hitting that person. So I didn't get that before. I get it now. If the person would have been on the road, I would have had enough line of sight to avoid that. Second, Mr. Moran alluded to Blue Water Trails, and I'm on that committee. Blue Water Trails is working indeed on an education component, but they also have asked people to do a little thinking if they're going down a major artery about using back streets instead. And if you take a look at the cycling or the trail map and the city street map, there are alternatives for almost every major arterial roadway. Instead of riding on that roadway, just going one block in and following in behind. So give that a thought for folks who feel threatened on the road. And Blue Water Trails will be coming out with some additional guidelines.
Thank you. I'll call the question. Those in favor? That's done. Thank you. Moving on, another contract, Old Lake Shore Road tender. Councillor Mitro, Councillor White. All those in favor? Passed. Next is related to new radio communications system, police service. Councillor Couch, Councillor Shulden. All those in favor? That is passed. Next is an investment policy for council to adopt. Councillor Shulden, Councillor Couch. All those in favor? That's done. Then moving on to a brownfield tax agreement with Carvest Properties. Councillor White, seconder. Councillor Shulden. All those in favor? That is done. Next is the proposed body rub parlor bylaw. It went out for public comment, and it's back to you.
So moved.
Councillor Couch, Councillor Shulden. All those in favor? That's done. Change of title to the city managers, the next report.
Move it. I have a question.
For Couch and Councillor Shulden.
We are simply talking about a change of title to bring us into compliance with other cities and what they call people. Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Perfect. Thank you.
All those in favor? That is done. Next is an agreement related to Sarnia Bay Marina. Councillor Gillis, Councillor Shulton, all in favor. Next is a report to you for Parks and Rec, another tender. There's a lot of them in here tonight. This is related to the Progressive Arena. Councillor Gillis, Councillor Bushy.
I have a question. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know if it was just me, but I did find this rather confusing with option 1, option 2, A and B, not really knowing what that was all about. Were there different packages, different bidding processes? I'm not too clear on exactly what this was all about.
Through your worship, it's just a difference in choice of equipment and longevity of that equipment, energy savings attributed to it. There's a lot of factors that had to be considered in those. So we worked along with Blue Water Power to determine which was the best package for use at PASA to last as long as possible.
Just as a suggestion, could we have a little bit more detail on exactly what that was? Because option 1, option 2 meant absolutely nothing to me, or A and B. So without any meat to that sandwich, I just could not figure out what it is you were trying to tell us.
Sure.
So I would appreciate a little more detail the next time.
Sure.
All
For your
question,
worship, we'll
those in
gladly
favor?
do that.
Thank you. Moving on, flat roof replacement for the Sarnia Arena. Councillor Mitro, Councillor Bushy. All in favor? And the next is the status report to you on the Harbor Dredging Project. And there's an overture there. Councillor White.
Nation.
Councillor Couch. All those in favor? That's passed. Next is the transfer payment agreement with the federal government on transit.
Gladly.
Councillor Gillis, Councillor Vucevic, all in favor? That is passed. Next is the software package agreement. Okay, moving ahead, Councillor Gillis, Councillor White.
Questions?
Sure, go ahead. And Councillor Gillis, too.
Okay, thank you. Just curious as to, just a couple questions. What is the implementation plan for this software? And how does it fit into our current IT restructuring process? And with that question, is this the Cadillac version, or is there a scaled-back version that we could possibly use that we could, modify with existing IT intelligence in our department?
Through the chair, this particular software package was looked at last year, and the previous director of transit was looking at getting this implemented. The one big bonus to this is it is the same software being used by Leo, Lambton Elderly Outreach, for the similar type of service that they provide. So there's definitely synergy with their software and our software, and the possibility of sort of that partnering aspect. And it will be a definite increase to our efficiency and effectiveness of our caravan service, where there will be a lot more customer ability to use to access the software online, make their own bookings, and it will definitely hopefully lead to increased ridership of the caravan system.
Sorry, and I apologize for blurting out all my questions at once. So the implementation plan, and how long will that take? What does that look like?
I apologize through the chair. I don't have all those details at this time as to what that might look like. Again, it was on the books. We were waiting to hear of this, the PTIF funding, in order to move forward. And again, when we're at the point of rolling this out, we will report back to council as to what that looks like when we're ready to roll this software out.
Thank you, Councillor Gillis. Councillor Mitro?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I really liked this program, the way it is described, with all of the customer added-on features for it, like, for example, call-out reminders for clients. I certainly like the way that it could integrate into the Leo outreach program, because it really shows us that we're trying to improve the mobility of our, not just of our seniors, but of people who are disabled who need the service. And we are working in tandem and working collaboratively with those other services to improve our service. And the Sioux has really enjoyed this, and that's a program that I'm familiar with as well. So I think it's going to pay out dividends for us here.
Councillor Mitro, Councillor Schulten.
Through your worship, to the head of engineering. So you mentioned that it could potentially have some cost savings. Have those been investigated at all as to what the efficiencies may return in what our current costs are, or is it just anticipated that there will be some?
Through the chair, it is anticipated, and we are hoping to measure those metrics and report back to council as to the success of that software implementation.
Councillor Schulten, and then the question.
Thank you, Mayor Bradley. Just two questions. So how are the caravans currently being scheduled and booked by the clients?
Through the chair, there is a current program being used, which is essentially a kind of a glorified spreadsheet, which does track. It's antiquated, and it's not as streamlined as we'd like it to be. The technology is there, hence this software, which we have seen in action. Staff did go to Leo and see how it operates. So this is a definite step up from what we have, and what we have is not very efficient.
So it's phone in right now?
Yes, if I might add, yes, it is phone in. It's very manual, and what this does is it greatly enhances the efficiency of that single operator to increase the number of trips scheduled through Caravan without increasing the staff component required for that transaction.
So I looked at the software, and I too believe that it looks great. My only concern is that when I'm reading the part about how riders can log in on their mobile devices and look for a ride, so to speak. And one time recently I was at a grocery store with the elderly woman who seemed to be waiting for a ride that was never coming. So I talked to her, and I guess she thought the caravan was coming. So I Googled the number and called, and the man said there was never any ride booked. You can't just call and book. So can we expect that people to have devices and have to be able to log on, or can they still call, or how will this be user-friendly sort of thing?
Through the chair, it will not be, you won't have to use a device. I mean, there still will be that call-in component. It's simply adding that element of being able to use your device.
Good, okay, thanks.
Call the question. Those in favor? Thank you. We have two notices of motion. We'll go first with Councillor Gillis and then Councillor Krukowski next.
I would move that motion if I get a seconder. I will.
Councillor Shulden.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for recognizing the motion. As a member of the Board of Directors of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, I have been sitting down and sharing best practices with board members who consist of people from coast to coast to coast, and it's usually well over 100 people that are sitting there. And we talk about various programs that we have within our communities, and this particular one, Firemark, came up, and there was a lot of discussion about that. This was something that I had never heard of before, but it just so happened that Thunder Bay was considering Firemark, and they were, one of the councillors who was on the board was asking other councillors about it. One person came forward who is the Deputy Warden of Simcoe and the Mayor of Essa, Terry Dowdall, who was very enthusiastic about this program, mainly because it's a Canadian company with an industry-recognized trademark technology known as indemnification technology. It maximizes the billing opportunities on behalf of fire departments by invoicing insurance companies directly for the costs of fire departments' attendance with respect to insured perils, using pre-existing clauses within insurance policies. What I liked about it, as he explained it to me, was that it's no extra cost to insurance holders because it's within their insurance policies. How we protect people from how we protect people's insurance policies is the Firemark works directly with insurance companies and only insurance companies. And monies that is received from this is placed into a reserve and can be used for capital, can be used for education or for training. And as I said before, Firemark is paid a percentage of the recovery of funds. One mayor that uses it in our own municipality is Mayor Steve Arnold. And I didn't even know that St. Clair was using this program. And I asked him about it and asked if I could use him as a reference, more or less, for the rest of you to understand. He said if you had any questions about it to give him a call. But they have received their first payment and they're very, very happy with the service. So I would ask that we invite Chris Carrier to come and speak to us about Firemark to see if we are interested in becoming a municipality who sees this as an opportunity for us to augment the fire department's budgets.
Call the question. Those in favor? Sorry.
Comment. I would be interested in hearing from, or getting a report from the city staff first on, you know, how things are done now compared to what this all involves and how they foresee that impacting, you know, just to be educated on that a little bit more first before we have a presentation from someone, or like at some point I'd like a staff report on this. What's the city manager's take on all this?
Are you asking, you're putting forward a motion to table this pending a report from staff?
At this point, I'd just like to ask the city manager's input on what I just said, please.
Chair to council. So the fire chief is aware of this from his circles of the fire chiefs in Ontario and has started to compile information on this. It is a good opportunity to perhaps provide this education session first, and then perhaps if council is still interested in pursuing it once they've heard from the Firemark representative, that would be the time to refer it for a staff report.
Okay, great, thanks.
I'll call the question. Those in favor? That's done. Councillor Savage, you have a notice of motion?
My notice of motion is based again in addition to the motion that was passed by this council before. I thought that, ironically, I had this request for consideration in my original draft of the motion that was passed by council, but then I thought that was just redundant. It was implicit enough from the wording that basically specified the city objects to transfer of non-essential assets from other municipality laws that are not needed for loss operation, and then, you know, if we have to go for dispute resolution, go to MB. I don't want to go on to MB. I don't want to waste any money on legal interpretation. I think this is quite clear. After the last meeting, one of the board members told me, why didn't you have this request for reconsideration? And of course, I could not make a motion to reconsider because I vote with minority. The procedure bylaw doesn't allow it. So I'm actually hopeful that, and I still follow with other means to resolve this issue, like writing the letter to the ministry that originally issued the transfer order. But I have a strong feeling that may actually pass. So this, all it is to ask the Lambton Area Water Supply Joint Management to reconsider this decision to transfer municipal water towers and associated lines in Brigden, Wyoming to the law system.
Councillor Schulten seconding. All those in favor? Yeah, that's passed. That's unanimous. Thank you. Moving on. Minutes. Councillor Rusevich. Minutes of
yes.
March 20th.
I move that the minutes of March 20th, 2017 regular meeting as printed be adopted.
All those in favor? Any urgent matters? Councillor Bushi, Councillor Gillis.
I just want to know where we stand with the Jackson Pool. I haven't received any information lately. Or where are we with the Jackson Pool?
Through your worship, we're still working on a report for council. We expect to bring that sometime in the next couple of months.
Or could you give me just an idea? Are we going to build one? Are we going to repair the one we have now? Or
we are assessing the damages to that pool, and it's excessive damage, to be quite honest with you. So at this point, we are working through estimating exactly what that means, and working on, of course, registration for all the swimming pool programs that we were successful in putting through at Tecumseh Pool last year, and we're kind of measuring that the registration process again this year.
Oh, I understand we're going to have a report the next meeting. Is that we're going to have a report on it the next meeting? Because the summer is just around the corner.
Yeah, I realize that. I'm not sure by next meeting, but certainly within the next couple, we'll have information for you.
Thank you.
Councillor Gillis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, it's Phragmite fire season, and I was out walking along the trail and noticed, by golly, there it was again. So I'm wondering, a question to you, Fire Chief. What are we doing? How are we trying to contain this, or can we contain this? We know that the county is looking into some Phragmite abatement programs, but we still have the problem of kids coming along and setting the Phragmites on fire and taking out people's fences and various other things in their backyard. So do we have anything to address this?
Do you want to take that as notice and come back to us?
Your Worship, there's already another committee working on this. It's not really a fire department. We respond, but it's an issue with the trails.
The Blue Water Trails is working on this?
Yeah, through your worship, we have met as a committee, and it's a bigger problem than just Parks and Recreation, as you can imagine. And we've been actually reaching out to some of the adjoining counties and others to find out what they're doing with their programs. We've met as a group because there are also ditches and other areas of the municipality that are dealing with this problem as well, so we're trying to combine our efforts. And we've actually been bringing in other resources from the province to help us to prescribe what our plan is. So we are, that is underway, and we expect that we'll bring something back to you soon. Certainly it's first and foremost in our minds, and we're staying on top of it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I had one other thing, if I may, Your Worship. I brought unfounded sexual assaults to this floor to talk about and to ask our Sarnia Police Services to do a review, and wasn't satisfied with an internal review, but nevertheless, that's what happened. And I did contact our police chief, and we had a good discussion. And I have to acknowledge the fact that he did a thorough review within the confines of what he was allowed to do and what the law would allow him to do. And as we were progressing in our discussions, I've since learned that there is a lawsuit that's being brought forward against the London Police Officer, the London Police Services, and the London Police Services Board on this very issue. So with that, realizing that there is going to be perhaps something happening in hopefully positive in the future as that lawsuit progresses, the chief and I have been talking about what is termed the Philadelphia model. And this is something that the person who has brought the lawsuit forward, and indeed what they have talked about in the Globe and Mail across the country, is the Philadelphia model. And I just wanted to let you all know that I am researching it, and the chief is researching it. He will bring a report back to the board. But we're trying to be proactive and trying to get ahead of, and maybe from this, Sarnia can take that step forward and be on the cutting edge of making changes.
Chief has briefed me fully on the issue, and I've also talked to the Sexual Assault Center. And there are a number of things happening provincially which would be most welcome, because it would bring about a common set of procedures and rules across the province instead of just individual actions. So I believe that we'll have something probably at the next police board meeting. Councillor Couch?
Thank you, Worship. I just have one item. Sometime either late Friday night or early Saturday morning, a person or persons took a four-wheel drive, I believe, vehicle into Canatera Park and proceeded to cause a lot of damage in the green space and went up onto the dune areas by the beach. The police have said that they're very interested in any information that the public may have that could help them track down whoever did this. I think it's disgusting. It's a complete waste of a public resource, and I know a lot of people in this town, if they could get a hold of them, it would not be pretty for them. So if anybody knows anything, call Crime Stoppers, and let's put an end to this stuff.
Councillor Brusevich, you want to move forward?
I move that items A to K under routine approvals, action and information be introduced.
All those in favor? Any items? Councillor Shulman?
Thank you, Mayor Bradley. Item H, Mr. Storehand's letter and concern about picking up green waste and grass clippings. Point well taken, and also the report was well done in the fact that waste collection, garbage and recycling are not in our contracts. And I mean, the community are very, I think, forward-thinking and wanting more things done with compost, but at the same time, some of them don't realize what we already are doing and how much, how costly it is in our annual budget. So if Mr. Storehand is listening, I am in talks with a lot of people in the community right now regarding composting ideas and initiatives, and perhaps this may help in the future.
Thank you. Councillor White, Councillor Mitro, Councillor Gillis.
Thank you, Worship. Just item J, just wanted to update that. Received an email from Councillor Leeper earlier in regards to the letter of support. That letter was mailed out already to Ministers Del Duca, Sousa, McMahon, and Nakvi, and received 51 signatures from 25 different municipalities. So for those who were able to jump on board for that, my appreciation for that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Mitchell, Councillor Gillis.
Yes, just, Your Worship, on item C, the workplace human rights and harassment, workplace violence policies, procedures, through Your Worship to City Manager or HR, whichever. I assume that between now and then we'll have some kind of training or information session on the new policy. Would that be before or after approval? I just have questions on a variety of the parts of it.
Well, through your worship to City Council, I think the intention is to introduce them in draft, allow for a consultation period as is indicated in the report, and then once they're brought back and finally approved, then we would roll out a training system and sessions for staff and council.
So then if we had concerns about how things are written or whatever, we'd submit those during this period while it's in draft?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Gillis, and then Councillor Brusevich, I'll ask you to move us forward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Coming back to item J, I just had an email from Mike Layton not too long ago. They've made the presentation, and they're very grateful to everyone who participated in that, and they're hoping for a positive outcome.
Thank you. Councillor Brusevich.
I move that items A to K under routine approvals, action information, as recommended or approved by this council, be adopted and appended to the minutes.
All those in favor? That's passed.
I move that civic reports be received and filed.
All in favor?
I move that bylaws number 1 to 18 as printed be introduced for the first and second reading thereof and be taken as read for the first and second time.
All those in favor? No questions.
I move that bylaws number 1 to 18 as printed be taken as read for the third time and finally passed.
All in favor? Adjournment.
I move that Sarnia City Council adjourn to its next regular meeting to be held on Monday, May 1st, 2017.
All in favor? Thank you, everyone.